Good morning and good afternoon, distinguished and honorable participants. May I have your attention, please? A warm welcome to the Policy Dialogue for African and Asian Audiences on enhancing cooperation between Africa and Asia in developing green minerals value chains on behalf of the African Development Bank Group. It's great to have everyone with us today. I'm Yuna Che, External Relations and Communication Officer of the African Development Bank. So today, the African Development Bank's Asia External Representation Office and the African Natural Resources Management and Investment Center jointly organized the second policy dialogue as part of the New Vision for Africa series. The virtual event titled Enhancing Cooperation Between Africa and Asia in Developing Green Minerals Value Chains will explore the role of green minerals in the energy transition and opportunity for cooperation between Africa and Asia to develop green mineral value chains in Africa. The inaugural policy dialogue focusing on the Asia-Africa cooperation on natural gas took place in May 2023. Please permit me to introduce and welcome the first speaker, Dr. Vanessa Usi at the African Development Bank, will present opening remarks. Dr. Vanessa Usi leads the African Natural Resource Management and Investment Center in the interim with responsibility for the center's strategic agenda, knowledge activities, programs, and intervention. The center supports the African Development Bank's regional member countries to harness their natural resources for sustainable development. Let's welcome Dr. Vanessa Usi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuna, and thank you to our participants and speakers. Welcome to this policy dialogue from wherever you are in Africa or around the world. So I'm going to read my speech. Please permit me. Good morning, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols duly observed. On behalf of the African Development Bank Group, I'm honored to welcome you to this virtual policy dialogue, which is co-organized by the Asia External Representation Office and the African Natural Resources Management and Investment Center. As you've heard from Yuna, our moderator, this is the second policy dialogue in the series, which is looking at a new vision for Africa. And today's event is focused directly on green minerals, with a view to fostering cooperation between African and Asian investors on developing green minerals value chains in Africa. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's vast green minerals, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and the rare earth elements, are critical inputs in the production of green renewable energy, which is central to the net zero transition. The growing demand for green technologies and solutions is driving the demand for these green or critical minerals, especially lithium and cobalt. Rising green minerals demand for the energy transition is pushing processed mineral product prices to astronomical levels and raising prospects of a green minerals boom in Africa. For instance, lithium carbonate prices have increased over 10 times since 2021. Also, the demand for battery and technology minerals is estimated to increase by 500% or fivefold by 2050, in reflection of the full switch to green renewable energy sources and decline in fossil fuel usage. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the energy transition has opened a window of opportunity for Africa's green minerals. To realize the investments and value in these green minerals assets, Africa needs to learn from past experience and do things differently, mainly through smart, effective development partnerships. We know that Africa holds vast deposits of these green minerals, and Asia has been successful in creating robust value chains, which have propelled their economies to new heights. Therefore, Africa and Asia can cooperate on win-win minerals development partnerships by investing in green minerals value chains in Africa. Such development cooperation can generate mutually beneficial outcomes. It can support industrial upgrading in Africa. It can promote knowledge, skills, and technological transfer and peer learning. It can also support infrastructure development and create new markets for trade and economic integration in Africa and Asia. Therefore, Africa and Asian cooperation on green minerals should define shared value frameworks which allow Africa to meet clean energy demand in specific markets and build regional value chains for local production of green energy materials such as batteries, electric vehicles, and solar panels. This is an outcome which will not leave Africa behind in the global energy transition. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, to develop Africa's green minerals potentials, there is a need for enhanced regional cooperation across the continent to maximize economies of scale and growth convergence, and to minimize transaction costs and avoid resource duplication. We will hear today at this policy dialogue of the efforts being made by the African Union, the African Development Bank, and our partners to develop an African green minerals strategy. The African Green Minerals Strategy is expected to guide regional cooperation by leveraging Africa's green minerals potentials to localize value chains for green technologies such as battery storage, electric vehicles, green infrastructure, green buildings, and other materials which are critical for the energy transition. In general, the African Development Bank Group has reoriented its agenda for natural resources to be more focused on facilitating investments that unlock the transformative potential of Africa's natural capital for inclusive and sustainable development. In keeping with our refreshed mandates, today's conversation will raise awareness on the benefits and opportunities for African and Asian cooperation on green minerals development. Specifically, we will look at investment in research and development, how we can cooperate on special economic zones in Africa, building demand for batteries and electric vehicles, human capital development, public-private partnerships, and environmental, social, and governance issues. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we can observe two broad types of nature dependency in the world today: nature reliance and nature resilience. The distinction between these two phenomena lies in value. Nature reliance is a situation of high nature dependency, but low localization of nature's values. And these values could include economic, social, and environmental value. To build nature resilience, countries must increasingly localize the value of natural assets in their economies. And this value could range from the returns from monetizing carbon sequestration asset values and building green industries and jobs from green or critical minerals. The African Economic Outlook 2023 estimates that 62% of Africa's GDP is dependent on natural resources and essential ecosystem services. On the other hand, Africa's exports are dominated by primary commodities. This situation suggests that Africa is highly nature reliant. Therefore, the task before us today is how to move Africa from a position of nature reliance to one of nature resilience. Smart partnerships in the global south, which support shared value in Africa and Asia, can help build Africa's nature resilience and underpin future economic growth in Asia. Because above all, sustainable development is about the creation and localization of value, whether this is intangible or tangible value. Also, as the wise men say, charity should begin at home. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as we gather here today to discuss more about investment opportunities for the African and Asian partnership on green minerals value chains. We are mindful of the transformative potential of Africa's green wealth. Africa's green wealth or natural capital is a key to a sustainable future, and these green minerals can play a transformative role in the energy transition. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let's make Africa's green minerals work for Africa. Let's build an Africa of nature resilience by leveraging win-win partnerships with Asia for shared value and inclusive sustainable development. I wish us all fruitful deliberations at this policy dialogue. Thank you. Una, back to you.
Thank you very much, Director Vanessa, for your insightful and encouraging remarks. So now we will have the session 1 titled Overview of the Role of the African Countries in the Global Critical Minerals Value Chain. I would like to welcome the first speaker, Dr. Paul Jordan. Dr. Paul Jordan is an African integrated development expert specializing in resource-based and spatial development strategy. He has wide experience working on economic growth and development in South Africa, the SADC, West and East Africa. He was a major contributor to the African Union Africa Mining Vision and Country Mining Vision, and has recently assisted in the formulation of the new regional mining vision for SADC and the African Union Commodity Strategy 2021, among others. I welcome Dr. Paul Jordan to share his view. Dr. Jordan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put a slide up, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, this is basically an Africa green mineral strategy on a page. So what we've seen in the background, I'll be quick, is climate change is a reality. We need as a planet to move to a low carbon economy and rising global mineral demand for energy transition. However, Africa is not the culprit. Africa is a minor contributor to greenhouse gases. So how does this impact on Africa? Africa's critical minerals remain the same ones as in the Africa Mining Vision, and they are the minerals for industrialization. But at the time, this transition is happening. So we see very clearly that Africa has 3 important comparative advantages in its resources. One is it has the minerals. 2, Africa has fantastic renewable energy resources, particularly hydro, but also solar, wind, bio, etc. And the third opportunity for Africa is half its people are unconnected, do not have electricity. So these 3 factors unfold in the African Development Bank's AGIMS, the Africa Green Minerals strategy. So the next is what are the strategic pillars, which is around developing our mineral sectors, people and technology, building the value chains, and good mineral stewardship. So we start with mining and processing, and immediately we see a massive leakage. These green minerals, as per the past, don't underpin African development, they underpin development in other countries. Then we have minerals into the priority value chains for clean energy, which is renewable energy equipment, hydrogen fuel cells, battery storage, lithium batteries, vanadium redox flow batteries, and then also into mobility, 2-, 3-, and 4-wheeler EVs. And then the very important opportunity is, of course, the mining supply chain, that Africa needs to start embedding that in Africa, not importing all of the mining capital goods and equipment. and we show that that market is about $10 billion that are being imported from the north in mining equipment and consumables and services. So what underpins all of this is building those mineral linkages from the AMV. The backward linkages, as I've just said, the mining supply chain, the forward linkages, the fiscal linkages, and our objective remains to energize and industrialize Africa. So although this is not a preeminent need of Africa, because we are not the culprits, most of Africa uses biomass, which is neutral, it is an opportunity. But this opportunity might end up with the last phase, the scramble for Africa, where Africa was just seen as a market for European manufacturers and a source of raw materials for European development. So how do we make this one different? Is to leverage our ownership of green minerals to create an African market whereby Asian companies can invest both in the upstream, in mining equipment and processing manufacturing in different African regions, and then into the downstream. So we don't see African minerals go off to other countries and they are re-imported. On the energy side, we see Africa's real comparative advantage in the longer term as hydro. Hydro is 1/10 the greenhouse gas emissions compared to solar. Solar is 10 times more dirty than hydro. Africa has enormous hydro and it's the cheapest. So the cheapest, cleanest renewable energy for Africa is in fact hydro. That can be complemented, because hydro takes very long, with solar to try and get energy to all of our people. And a big role we see for Asia is assisting us in setting up the plants for the wind, for the solar, and also the enormous capital that's required to realize Africa's massive hydro resources, which would then make Africa by far the lowest emitter of greenhouse gas. Well, it already is, but then it will be almost zero if we can move to the hydro. And then finally, Africa's mobility is we really need to work in partnership with Asia in the building of the supply of small, lithium ferrous phosphate LFP batteries for 2, 3, and small 4-wheeler vehicles, which are the highest demand in Africa. We need to be converting all of the 3-wheeler tuk-tuks to electric, as has already happened in India. And we need the expertise of countries like India, China, and others in Asia in order for us to supply cost-effective mobility to all of our peoples. I think I've overstayed my time, or shot over my time.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jordan, for sharing the informative information. And we would like to listen to you more during the panel discussion. Let me invite the second speaker for sharing the view perspective. Let me see. Yes. So let me welcome the second speaker, Dr. Marikita, who is the interim director of the African Minerals Development Center called AMDC. And also she is a the AMDC is a specialized agency of the African Union based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Dr. Marikita is a Pan-African center dedicated to harness Africa's mineral resources for sustainable development and structural transformation in Africa through implementing the African Mining Vision. As a founding member of the AMDC when it was a project under the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa called UNECA, she actively contributed to the development of major implementing tools that sought to link the mining sector to other sectors of the economy through value addition, local content, and sustainable mining, among others. So, Dr. Marikita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for Yuna for inviting me. First, I would like to congratulate AFDB for this very timely and very important meeting with our Asian counterparts. It's a very unique one and a very welcome one. Just to give Dr. Vanessa and even Paul Jordan elaborated on most of what I wanted to say, so I will just be summarizing my views on the Africa Minerals Development Center is actually established to implement the Africa Mining Vision, which was alluded to by both speakers. So let me just dive into the Africa Mining Vision just to give an overview for those who are not maybe not very familiar. It was a vision that was developed in 2009, 14 years ago, by Africans from different institutions, including mentioned by Dr. Paul Jordan. It was at the time, even in 2009, there was a commodities boom that we in Africa, we thought that Africans were not really benefiting from fully, even though there was a commodity price boom and companies were coming in Africa and there was a general benefit, but not coming through to the African people, especially. So the Africa Mining Vision was developed in 2009, and the main essence of it is to make sure that minerals lead to sustainable development and inclusive growth, and that it benefits the African people in general. So that's the historical perspective on the 2009. But historically, in general, even though mining has existed for hundreds of years, the results for Africa has been very minimal. I mean, we talk about the resource curse, but I would like to say maybe paradox of the plenty, because it's not about resources. Having resources is not a curse per se. It's how you exploit them, how the governance structure is done, and how you really put forward the policies essential to make sure that you retain value on the continent. So historically, it operated as an enclave, meaning that there's raw materials extraction exported raw to Western or elsewhere and coming back to Africa with some high finished goods, much more expensive. Even if there is taxation and revenue, there are so many leakages through illicit financial flows, transfer pricing. So it was really not capturing, Africa was not capturing the maximum out of the minerals. That's why the Africa Mining Vision emphasizes on the linkages part that Dr. Pauljan just mentioned, backward, upstream, backstream, linkages, industrialization, value addition, making sure that the assets remain in Africa. Otherwise, you'll be exporting technology, you'll be exporting jobs, nothing will be created. So the surest way, and I know that our Asian counterparts will agree, to transform an economy is through industrialization. No other continent, has industrialized, has transformed their economies without industrialization, whether it's manufacturing or else. So we Africa also, we feel that this is the path to our development, to our transformation. So we are keen on this value addition aspect. So very exciting to be with our Asian counterparts, because we can learn so much from their experiences. Currently, the situation with regards to critical minerals, the numbers were mentioned. The numbers, this is an opportunity for Africa because the demand for these critical minerals is soaring, and we have the minerals in our soil. But Asian companies are in Africa, especially the Chinese, especially on this critical minerals side. but we have to have a win-win partnership. Chinese companies are here with a lot of infrastructure building. There are some agreements, resource-backed loans that are made based on infrastructure, resource-based infrastructure. And mostly, we have to say that, you know, the raw materials taken from even our Chinese counterparts are exported raw. So we want to change that paradigm. We want to make sure that we retain the value. We want to make sure to be in that value chain. There is a compelling example from the DRC, a finding from Bloomberg that said that there is a cost and emissions advantage of having for the precursor plant of lithium, of nickel, manganese, cobalt precursor cathode in the DRC, compared to China, compared to Poland, compared to the USA. So we have the cost and the emissions advantage of localizing production factories in Africa. So that's where we think that, you know, we need to have a win-win strategy with our Asian counterparts. We really need to make sure that, you know, this time around there's a value added on the continent locally, and it's the surest way of retaining value. Asian companies have the technology, they have the skills that we can benefit from. It's very capital intensive as well. There's so many things that we can learn from each other. So I really hope that this will be ongoing conversation, and we'll achieve a win-win. So I look forward to having more discussions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marikita, for sharing your views, and like as you emphasize the win-win partnership between Africa and Asia, and then changing the paradigm for, the win-win partnership. That is really well noted. And then also thank you for the introducing the African Mineral Development Center, its aim and purpose and activities that, you know, we are understand well from your explanations. Thank you very much once again. So let me welcome the third speaker, Dr. Suleiman Koni, to share his opinion. So Dr. Koni is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Chamber of Mines, having served as the Director responsible for analysis, research, and finance at the Chamber. As a Director, Dr. Koni managed the industry's engagement with stakeholders in developing supply chain regimes and address the security concerns and technical issues of the industry. Also, Dr. Koni is a founding member of the Steering Committee of Ghana's Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative and the Executive Director of the ECOWAS Federation of Chambers of Mines. He also serves on the Governing Council of the University of Mines and Technology. He is a former National Petroleum Authority board member. Before joining the chamber, he worked also with Shell Ghana. So Dr. Koni, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I bring you warm greetings from Accra, Ghana, and from the Ghana Chamber of Mines, as well as the ECOWAS Federation of Chambers of Mines. Africa's role in global supply chains of critical minerals, and as has been already expressed by previous speakers, it is well acknowledged that Africa has significant endowments of critical minerals needed for the just transition and other important activities that ensure global progress and advancement. African countries need to put in place policies that translate into legislation, licenses, agreements, and permits with a overarching objective to retain optimal value in the country. Essentially, what I'm reflecting is the need for us to be calm and really understand and appreciate what we really want to do. Sometimes we just come up with interesting policies, but then how do we translate these policies into actionable, objectives, seen through legislation, seen through the various agreements that are signed between the host country and mining companies or even exploration companies. So it's important that that trajectory is actually addressed. So the overarching objective of retaining optimal value within host country, I think that should really reflect across the board from policy through to agreements and even legislation as well governing the mining industry. And over and above that, and related to that, I must say, has to do with the need for us to attract investment into exploration. You don't know what you have. How do you even, engage with others regarding what you have? So it's very important that we have a special eye on exploration. Exploration is so critical that we are able to raise the needed capital to do exploration for these critical minerals. Once we are able to do that, it gives us the leverage to now start engaging with counterparties who may be willing to actually do business with us. Over the years, we have relied on a lot of FDI for exploration. And I'm placing on record a counter view to ask the question, what can we do for ourselves as Africans in terms of raising, capital internally within Africa to do exploration? We all know that most legislations will give priority to exploration companies who make commercial finds for them to mine. And through that, ownership is actually determined. So it therefore serves our interest as Africans to have a close look at exploration. How do we fund exploration? We all know exploration is very risky. It requires some good amount of capital to do, effective exploration. But we cannot continue to throw our hands in the air and say no. We always would want to invite private capital, FDI from foreign lands to come and do this for us. So I think we need to have a special eye and interrogate the question. How do we raise funds from within Africa to do exploration? For me, that is critical because the question of ownership of mines on account of granting of licenses and leases is quite critical. So where are the entrepreneurs in Africa to go into exploration? What about pension funds? Because we all know that one of the ways of funding exploration is to look at pension funds. Pension funds which come from offshore. We also have pension funds within Africa. Is it about time we started looking at pension funds and probably a little proportion of pension funds held within Africa to go into exploration? It also means that for us to have a buoyant exploration for critical minerals, all the challenges around exploration, investment attraction are actually looked at. For example, we need to dissuade instability, investment concerns around instability, insecurity, and seeming resource nationalism, especially when it comes to shifting of the goalposts. We all know what I'm talking about. That having gone through and thought through exactly what you want, we want this reflected in legislation and agreements such that you don't shift the goalposts in midstream. These are situations which actually dissuade exploration, investment into exploration. We also need to conduct studies to really understand the whole value chain of whichever critical minerals we have in Africa, and in particular each host country, because we know we have diverse resources across Africa. We need to really understand what we have and its relationship with development, with the energy transition, with progress of society. We need to understand all of these things. And here we need to, once we understand this, we need to then identify which part of the value chain we want to pitch camp, given our own strengths and then our own weaknesses. At the end of the day, we want to optimize value within the country, but you don't want to be that sentimental and say, because country A has done it, I would also do it, when for all intents and purposes, you don't have the capacity. And if you're not careful, at the end of the day, you destroy value. So yes, we want to add value, we want to optimize as much as possible, but these have to be undergirded by credible studies, which will make sure that in the long run, we actually benefit as Africa. Where there are short-term constraints, we should never be dissuaded, especially when these constraints can be overcome in the long term. So yes, we know that sometimes we start endeavors in the short term, there are constraints, but if there is every likelihood that in the medium to long term, these constraints can be overcome, this is where we need to push harder, put all the resources we have behind these endeavors, and make sure that at the end of the day, we are competitive and we are able to establish ourselves within that space. Again, we need to establish research and development facilities on the continent in partnership with global leaders. We know that Asia is a global leader, especially when it comes to R&D in this space. It is as well that we are having this conversation. We need the partnership for us to work together. And like I'm saying, we need to be bold. We need to be courageous. We should go to the negotiation table from a position of strength, because at the end of the day, the minerals are here. The minerals are within Africa. And therefore, that is the kind of posturing we should actually go into negotiation with various partners. That at the end of the day, we want to optimize as much as possible within the continent. Again, when it comes to producing these minerals, we certainly will need some pieces of infrastructure. How do we leverage this infrastructure for the greater good of society? Paul Jordan has gone through the history of mining in Africa and how we have effectively left the linkages untapped, undeveloped, and all we have done is actually ship raw materials to other countries without having the desired impact, within Africa. I think we have a unique opportunity to change the narrative with the discovery of critical minerals within Africa, given the significance of critical minerals for the larger economy, and say to ourselves that for once we are going to leverage what we have for the greater good, to ensure that we are able to promote, the achievement of the various SDGs to reduce poverty and gender growth, and gender equality and environmental sustainability. At the end of the day, you want to promote regional cooperation. Sometimes markets are so small, and therefore, even as we do this, we know that already there are some good partnerships within Africa. I think these are models for us to really understand and appreciate that these are lessons for us. Like I have said, the narrative of the past is gone. We have a unique opportunity. And I think that with our partners from Asia, we should be able to work together in tandem on good faith basis, mutually beneficial relationships, such that on the back of the critical minerals that we have, we can for once develop our continent. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coney, for sharing your insightful view. And then I totally agree with you that you emphasize that the mutual benefit for both Asian and African, in terms of the green minerals, and also for the long term that we need a good partnership and also negotiation because the minerals are in Africa here. And then we would like to hear more of your views in the discussion session. We look forward to it. Yeah. So before we move to the next session to hear the perspective by the Asian experts, let me remind you, our participants regarding the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen is active now. So please feel free to leave your questions during the seminar. And the AFDB experts and also our distinguished guests will try to respond to your questions as they come lively or during the Q&A session towards the end of the event. All right, so let's move to the session 2 to hear the Asian expert perspectives on the Asian renewable energy industry and how to enhance Africa-Asia cooperation to prolong the value chain of critical minerals in Africa. Now I would like to welcome Professor Zhang Daojun from China. Professor Zhang is a professor of international political economy in the School of International Studies, Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University, where he also directs a center on transnational issues and holds a professionalship in the university's Ocean Research Institute. Professor Cha specialized in studying non-trading security issues in China's foreign relations, with a particular focus on energy, food, and transboundary water issues. Professor Cha serves on advisory boards of the China Chapter of Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, Chinese Association for International Understanding, China-US Friendship Association and China-Myanmar Friendship Association. So, Professor Zha, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Beijing. As introduced, I'm a professor. I'm not an investor or a technology developer. For me, the webinar we're having today is indeed a progress. African concerns and its wishes in terms of making use of smart use of its resources are real and needs to be taken seriously. If we think about post-war history, if we use Latin America as a benchmark, there was a time when what was thought to be efficient for investment capital was good for all, but that was not the case. If you look at Latin America's so-called lost decade, it was a situation just like many, one of our speakers earlier said, Latin American natural resources were mainly designated for European and North American markets. So the case for making African minerals serve African interests is quite strong. And for that matter, I really applaud the intellectual leadership, the African Development Bank's Tokyo office, for organizing today's webinar. That said, today here in East Asia, including China, if you look at EVs and batteries, value chains, people around the world have a sense of envy or have a sense of, let's say, well, there are mixed feelings in some quarters, right, of the world. But it's very important to bear in mind, if you look at China, it wasn't until 1997 for more than half of China's export value to come from non-minerals or food. People generally forget that. In other words, there was a long history of China exporting raw materials, minerals, coal, and including animal hide, to earn foreign currency. Now, if you look at one of the interesting cases was when the United States Congress did a study of, what material benefits China reopening relationship with China back in the early 1970s could do for the U.S. Actually, the constant of China was considered to be of value, particular value, because of large amount of supply and because of the relatively cheap value. And tungsten in those days came from Jiangxi. That's today where it's major center for rare earth elements. So I guess you understand, you see my point. I'm not here to talk about China. What's really relevant to the African discussion from where I sit in terms of an academic, I would think it's very important to focus on demand side management. That is to say, you need to have a local product ecosystems. Earlier, one of our speakers said one of the advantages was that half of African populations remain unconnected through electricity, whether on grid or off grid. Now, this indeed, this advantage needs to be more forcefully in a business sense addressed. I often think about a Chinese company that invests in battery use in Sri Lanka. What was deployed was not necessarily the most advanced, but was most applicable technologies. So if there was a lesson to be shared in terms of China's transformation from a minerals exporter to today a major we still export minerals, but we export higher shares of manufactured products. It's that joint ventures and other forms of cooperative development can help sustain international linkages. So what I'm really saying is that for African economies, one of the industrial policies is rather than placing conditions on outside capital, probably one strategy is to demand different forms of shareholding or equity shareholding. If you leave a mining operation or later on the processing operation entirely to the hands of foreign investors, including those from China, frankly speaking, you may not really have a seat at the table in the world of business. After all, money talks. Now, in that connection, if you recall what I said about the Latin American experience of the 1950s and 1970s, is that to accept some level of horizontal, to promote horizontal integration of business rather than accepting vertical integration. Many of the speakers made that point quite well. But what I'm going to say next might be controversial. Later, we could probably discuss that in the discussion. That is to say, on the one hand, it is true that you reject being treated in an exploitative way. On the other hand, impetuses of what's sometimes called resource nationalism also needs to be resisted, because whether you mention cobalt, you have lithium, you have many other forms of minerals, they're called critical, not because of geography. Worldwide, these materials are abundantly available. But just so happens, in terms of the relative lower cost of mining, in terms of the geological conditions, there is more attention to the so-called lithium triangle in South Africa or the DRC in Congo. What I'm really trying to say is that policies, including those by African governments, probably should bear in mind on the durability, the long-term profitability of foreign investments. In that way, you get a foot on the ladder of industrial upgrading, and then slowly you climb up together. But at the end of the day, that ladder has to be built by local governments, in this case, what I mean, local governments on the African continent. I think I've spoken too long, but thank you very much. I hope that in some ways could be useful. Thank you, Yuna.
Thank you, Professor Jia, for sharing your suggestion and also insightful view. That I also agree that we need cooperation, but also like African nations has to be built. By their local government, as you mentioned in the end. And we would like to listen to you more of your insightful view during the discussion session. Thank you once again. Let me invite the last speaker from Japan, Mr. Hiroki Katayama. Mr. Katayama joined the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, called JB, in 2006. And then he engaged in oil and gas finance in UAE, Qatar, US, Canada, and Australia. And then he worked at the JB Treasury Department for its budget in 2009 and 2010. From 2012 to 2014, he was the second leader to Japan Ministry of Finance as a section chief, covering management of multilateral development banks, MDBs. Back to JBIC in 2014, he joined the JBIC Private Equity Fund team, and now he is a director of mining and metal finance department, leading a financing team to support Japanese corporates securing critical minerals. Mr. Katayama, the floor is yours. We look forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ina-san. Yes, and good evening from Tokyo's distinguished participants. I'm Hiroki Katayama, the director of the Division 1, the JBIC's Mining and Metals Finance Department, which covers the critical minerals supporting the Japanese corporate foreign activities. And today, it's very honored to be here participating in this webinar. Yes, hosted by the African Development Bank groups. And first of all, I'd like to introduce the JBICs. Maybe some of them are not familiar with that. JBIC is a governmental institution owned by the Japanese government. And we support the many Japanese corporate activities. But among that, the securing the natural resources is one big mission for us. And we support the natural resources project around the world, which involves the Japanese corporate investment or the supplying the equipment or something else. And we today, yes, within these seminars, I understand that other panelists mentioned before, in order to achieve the carbon neutrality, energy conversion is essential. And for that reasons, many countries are securing the critical minerals. And at this moment, Africa is a very prominent continent which have so much resources of the critical minerals. And this recognition is also shared with the multilateral bases. And I understand that in the multilateral perspectives, the mineral security partnership was established within some countries in 2022. And this partnership involves to secure and ensure the critical minerals are produced and processed and recycled in a manner that supports the ability of the country to realize the full economic development benefit of their geological endowment. This partnership is under discussion within the multilateral basis. And this year, Japan hosted the G7 summit, and there the global leaders endorsed the 5-point plan for critical mineral security. That is also related to the mineral security partnership. And among 5-point plans, the point 2 includes the development of resources and supply chain responsibilities. So currently, the securing the critical mineral is a global agenda for many countries. So from our perspectives, under such global alliance, and also the government of Japan, JBIC are working on the securing the critical minerals and supporting the upstream development and the refinery, and also finance support to the infrastructure. That is the role of the JBICs. And today, within the seminar, I would like to introduce and discuss the example of the example of the Latin America, which is the president of the natural resources countries who use the natural resources industry for their growth of the macroeconomics. And we support so many projects in Latin America. So I would like to introduce how they attract the investment from the foreign countries, and also how they collaborate with the foreign partners. I think this will be a good indicator for the African countries, and also some kind of the financing schemes which can be invested by the foreign investors, and for the risk sharing among the Asian and African countries. I think such kind of the lesson can be shared with the African countries, and I think such kind of lesson will be beneficial for the seminar's participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your views and suggestions. We will listen to you more during the panel discussion. Before we move to the next session, I wanted to announce again that regarding the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen that you can see, that we received a few questions. During the Mr. Katayama's presentation. But please feel free to leave any question you may have. So now we are moving to the most exciting session, that is panel discussion and Q&A. That will be moderated by my dear colleagues, Fred. Mr. Fred Kabanda is the division manager of extractives at the AFDB African Natural Resources Management and Investment Center. Mr. Kabanda oversees the oil, gas, and mining sector. Fred has 30 years of experience in the extractives industry, working with policy, regulation, and commercial aspect. Let me pass the floor to my dear colleague, Fred. Fred?
Thank you very much, Yuna. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. In our next segment of this webinar, what we will do is to have an interactive session with our distinguished speakers. And what I mean here is I'll ask them some questions, but the audience will also ask questions. You will help me to ask questions that I may not have asked after they have made their presentations. So the Q&A box is open as our speakers respond, and there's something that's not clear, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. So far, what the speakers have done is to only give us teasers on this topic of how we can enhance cooperation between Africa and Asia in developing the green minerals value chains in Africa. So I will start with the Professor Jia, because he has to leave after some time, and then I'll follow this with the Dr. Paul Jordan, Dr. Marit, Mr. Katayama, and then I'll end with our private sector, Dr. Kony. So starting with the professor, you have highlighted in your discussion that indeed Africa needs to create demand. And this is where I would like you to come in further and explain. Every place one goes throughout the world, there is no place that you will go and not find an Asia-made renewable energy equipment, in operation. So this is where I would like you to come in. Drawing from this success of Asia in the manufacturing of renewable energy equipment products and the downstream side of the mineral value chains, how do you think Africa can establish tailored industrial policy framework to achieve this similar success in the battery and EV value chains? And if you could answer this and also try to maybe go further, since you talked about demand, and tell us what lessons you think Africa can learn from Asia on the creation of the required demand for the EV and battery products in Africa. Professor Shaw, are you there? Please.
Yes,
proceed.
I'm here. What I meant to say by demand side management actually is what I observed as earlier introduced, that I served as an advisor to the China-Myanmar Friendship Association. It's that in many societies, especially against the background of societal insistence on ownership of resources, that's quite legitimate. Is that sometimes locals say, well, these are minerals in my neighborhood, and my share better be as economical as possible, or in many instances free. That's a very understandable proposition. But on the other hand, unless the government has sufficient amount of public capital to support that free or really below the market cost consumption of energy, electricity, let's make it more specific, that local demand cannot be sustained. So there has to be some give and take. I'm not saying, actually today, industrial policy is no longer a dirty word. Governments subsidize, including, the champion of free market economies. The United States subsidizes the consumption as well. So it's really a partnership based on, let's say, at least three components. One is the consumers who need to contribute. A second is government needs to contribute. And third would be the local, external investors. So in that regard, you can demand can be fostered. But in that connection, if you look at Japan, that began earlier in terms of basic infrastructure consumption, creation of demand will have to follow the principle of leaving no village or no family behind. And one, especially in multi-ethnic societies, you treat each and every group as equals. There are other examples to follow.
Sure. So maybe, Professor, I would like to you to comment on what's currently happening in Africa in terms of the raw materials, the countries that have these abundant raw materials, and the fact that they would like to. They have put a ban on raw material export for basically localizing the value chains for battery and electric vehicle value chains on the continent. Comment on the effectiveness of this policy and how maybe from your experience, you said you're still exporting raw materials today. How is this, how can this be effective,
well,
so to say?
African countries are not the only ones that quote unquote ban export of raw materials. Many other governments do that. The real question is, also each country and each has a sovereign right to govern the natural resources it sees fitting. Then even for the European Union, right, or that champions for setting rules. Here, the challenge for a government in designing these restrictions, I would think, should follow at least two principles. One is that you use these restrictions for policy as a policy incentive to encourage local manufacturing. In this, for example, rather than allowing the removal of ores, raw materials, you would say, fine, I have a ban, but at the same time, if a foreign company comes in and start semi-processing at least, then that company would be exempted from the ban. Of course, along the way, you will need to create supportive industries to be part of the partnership. Earlier, Mr. Katayama, I believe, spoke about the risk management, because companies will say, my goodness, this is going to be too risky for him. And second, so ban, but not as an emotive expression. It's an invitation of or encouragement of inward investment in technology. But secondly, it's very important, is no matter where you begin, if the audience still remember what I said about a ladder to climb, in that you will have to invest in skills spillover. So in other words, it begins by training your workers to do basic jobs, and then in the process, you you don't leave an operation, either the mining process or the semi-processing process, entirely to a foreign company. You want to have your workforce involved and the managerial team involved, and slowly they grow up in the process. That also actually is something foreign companies would welcome, because very few foreign companies want to bring all the workers from outside the project, and the more local workers, the better. The more, or in a progressive way, when the more local workers get paid better because of their skills, when their income levels rise, local economy thrives, the project can be more sustainable, and the business risk would get reduced.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Professor Shaw. Thank you very much for this intervention. I think I would like to encourage our participants to put your questions in the Q&A box. Even when he may not be able to be here, we can pass on the questions and we'll get answers directly from him. So thank you very much. We will excuse you when your time comes, such that you leave. But we would like to appreciate the time and the ideas that you have given. Emphasis on the need for partnerships and the aspects of skills development are very critical for this. So thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you. Let me now move on to Dr. Paul Jordan. And maybe, Paul, I really would like to start where Professor Shah stopped. You are helping us on the Africa Green Minerals Strategy, and we are working closely with you, Marit, and the other stakeholders. We know that there is indeed abundant resources in Africa, mineral resources, which could be used for renewable energy potential. In other words, the opportunities you highlighted at the beginning are indeed true of, the minerals exist, renewables, and the demand that Professor was talking about, which is the lack of electricity. So in your opinion, Professor Dr. Paul Jordan, what do you think of the same ban on raw materials in order to concentrate, enhancement of the renewable energy and electric value production in the value chain in order to address those challenges of, lack of electricity for about 600 million people? What would you like to say about this, Paul?
Thanks, Fred. Zikomo. Yeah, on your question, on a ban of raw materials, I'm not sure that's a good idea, but what could be is like Indonesia and other countries is an export tax, but then we immediately hit problems because the European raw materials strategy resulted in clauses in the economic partnership agreements, the EPAs by the Europeans, that prohibit us from any form of export limitations, any form of export taxes or any form of export restrictions, because the Europeans want free access to Africa's minerals. Now, one might say, well, you could have an export tax on the goods going to Asia. You can't, because immediately you would have scallywags in Europe doing arbitrage. So they would take our minerals at zero export tax and supply them to Asia. So basically, by the Europeans putting that clause in the EPA, they basically banned Africa from having any form of export restrictions that might encourage downstream beneficiation. So I think that's the most important answer, is we are limited by the European EPAs, which we didn't want, which I'm aware that we fought, but the Europeans said they would then shut their markets to some of our other goods. The other one, just going to the questions, very quickly to reply, Jeremy, you asked about regional partnerships, especially around SEZs. Absolutely. I'm, a very early supporter from 2016 of the trans-border SEZ between DRC and Zambia, going way back. And I think that that could really work, where both countries benefit, and where we could even look at some Asian examples of cross-border SEZs. And then Mr. Professor spoke about the export taxes. I've addressed that. The other one he spoke about was skills, and I think that is absolutely vital, and it's very clearly in the Africa Mining Vision. It's also very clear in the Africa Green Minerals strategy, that all mining licenses, sorry, before I say that, in addition to the state's investment in skills formation, all mining licenses should have at least 5% of payroll spent on skills development within the country or Africa. In addition, in technology development, 1% of all mining companies' sales should go into local technology development, RDI, research, development, and innovation. Then there's a question from Yamamoto on the AFDB, what is it doing to get countries to work together? I think the answer then has already been answered by Fred, that it's developing an African green mineral strategy, and there are clear instruments coming out of that strategy where we'd like to augment the great breakthrough we've had on trade with the African Continental Free Trade Area. So there we are creating this massive demand now with duty-free access. So if an Asian company puts a big electric tuk-tuk plant in Dar es Salaam, they can now, that plant, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Indian, that plant, the products can go throughout Africa duty-free. Nearly. I am aware that on capital goods, we are still finalizing some of the rule of origin at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in Accra. So the answer to the question from Yamamoto is that the Africa Development Bank, working closely with the Africa Union and the AMDC, and Marit can come in on this, we're trying to develop those policies. What do we need? One of them is already mentioned by the Honorable Professor. We need export tariffs like Indonesia, I think 20%, to encourage. You're not stopping it then, it's just you can export, but you will pay a penalty if you go to the next step. So if you're a concentrate and you go to a blister, you duck the tariff. And in time, then we'll have that on blister. And if you on blister, you go like in Zambia, you then go to cathode, you duck the tax. And then you have it on cathode. And if you go to continuous glass rod, you duck the tax. It's a very effective method. And the Europeans have used that a lot. And Asians have also used it a lot. We look at some of these minerals from China, where they have said Chinese manufacturing comes first. And as the professor said, that's completely reasonable, and we need to do it. So we hope that this fantastic initiative by the African Development Bank, in partnership with the Africa Union, and I hope going into a partnership with the African Continental Free Trade Area, will result in a single market where Africa becomes a very, very attractive place to put in a PV panels plant. What are PV panels? It's nothing but taking silica, smelting it, and then you need masses of renewable energy, particularly hydro would be ideal, but solar, and growing the crystals, and then turning those crystals into the panels. And then, of course, you've got the cover, the special hail-resistant cover glass. So it's not that difficult. And if the whole African market was available, I think that many Asian companies would be very interested in locating plants in West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, and so on. So I believe this initiative of the African Development Bank, together with the AU, could start creating the conditions for all of those industries I spoke about, all of the mining inputs, all the mining capital goods, all of the renewable energy capital goods, all of the renewable energy services, all of those to increasingly be located in Africa, where we have a single market. And what the Africa Green Mineral Strategy suggests is we also need a common market. We need an outer common tariff for these goods that's not too distortionary, a tariff of 10% or less on these industries, which would then assist the investors because it would give them a competitive advantage. Again, if they located a plant in Africa, they'd have an advantage against imports from overseas. So I don't know if I've covered all of the questions. I will go back and check. Fred, have I satisfied you?
No, thank you very much, Paul, especially because you have now started answering the Q&A questions and also responding to my own questions. But before I let you go, I would like you to comment on the point you raised on the fact that you're saying CBAM will actually discourage or hinder value addition in Africa. Since we are now setting the strategy today, is there something that we could do to reverse this? Just a comment from you on this before I let you go.
Yes, in the last interactions with Brussels, they say they've moved away from that very venal raw material strategy from 10 years ago, where they said in that strategy very clearly that the EU must use its trade negotiations to make raw materials unfettered supply, to allow raw materials from Africa into EU. They now say they're moving away from that, but I'll kind of only believe them if they come back and say, oh, in the EPAs, we now going to scratch out clause 16. We're going to scratch out the clause saying no export restrictions. So, you know, otherwise it's just words, because you're not moving away while those clauses remain in the economic partnership agreements. Have I answered your question?
Okay, work in progress, basically. So thank you very much, Paul, for this. Thank you. And I would like to encourage all the speakers that if you look at the Q&A box and you find a question that directly relates to you, when I give you the audience, please address that as Paul has done. So for my colleagues who are monitoring the Q&A box, let's tick off those questions that have been answered, such that we only leave those that are pending. So I'll move on now to our next speaker. Marit, 2 questions for you, and I will follow these up from Paul's submission. Marit, are you there? Yes. I would like to start from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which Paul talked about. And like you know, many African countries possess different types of critical minerals. I would like to ask you how you think they can cooperate and integrate in order to attract bigger investment for economies of scale, including from Asia, in order to leverage opportunities under the AFCFTA. That would be one part. The second would relate to your work as basically from your work at the African Minerals Development Corporation, AMDC, African Minerals Development Center. Here, we see that historically, and as has been explained all through this discussion so far, Africa is seen as a source of raw materials. However, in the implementation of the AMV, like you explained, we can actually be able to industrialize Africa and therefore add value. My question here is, what is AMDC doing in order to bring about this transformation that you highlighted, and what challenges are you facing as you go along? Over to you, Marit.
Thank you very much, Fred, and thank you for the lovely discussions. I really enjoyed hearing the perspective from our Asian counterparts, which is very essential. So sorry to digress a little bit, but I really liked the fact that the professor was suggesting that we should create demand in Africa, and that's our aim, especially for the demand for electric vehicles. We're starting with the 2- and 3-wheelers. These are the quick wins. And, producing batteries, as we said, I mean, even physically, the batteries are heavy. So transporting them again to Europe or to Asia would not have a long-term perspective strategy. So it's really important to create demand. And he also mentioned, I'm not sure if he's still here, he mentioned joint ventures, which are also very essential. And he mentioned the ladder. And I'm tying it up with also what we're trying to do in AMDC, is to really have these kinds of innovative but practical, again, practical, not just talking about practical, how to really go about it. And this Africa Green Mineral Strategy is a very good starting point where we come in. But for practical purposes, we really need to see how we do joint ventures and what are the challenges. So going back to your questions, and I like also in the Q&A, let me go back, sorry, is it Amir? Amit Jain asked about this is downstream mineral value chain is far more complex than export bans. So refining, smelting, etc., etc. So he's asking about the practicality, which I like. And so let me go back to this. I mentioned a little bit about the Democratic Republic of Congo battery precursor plant initiative, which is very concrete. So it has all the elements there. That's why I find it very compelling to have that. So there's a pre-feasibility study that is being undertaken under the Afreximbank is the one that put the financing. So they're really looking into all what it needs to have a precursor plant, which region, which area. It was supposed to be between Zambia and DRC, but reality is that they couldn't find an area that just joined, so we are doing two separate special economic zones. And is there infrastructure there? Is it close to any port? Is it close? All of these other. Is there electricity? Is there, because as you know, it's very energy consumption is very high. So do we have to rely on the Inga Dam? Or you have to be just to showcase that when you come to practicality on how to really create these value chains, you really need to have a practical to see what it takes. And I want to delve in on the of course the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and market, and Paul Jordan also mentioned it, has a huge potential. If we go again to this example, because I like it's concrete, DRC has cobalt. It also has lithium that is less developed than in Zimbabwe, for example. South Africa has manganese, graphite you find in Mozambique, nickel you find in Madagascar. Not every country needs to have a factory. So it really needs for economies of scale to come in together. And for instance, if DRC is building a precursor plant, then how can what is the differential between Zambia and Zambia has a lot of copper. They're kind of adding value to some of it, not to a large extent, but how can it be improved? So all these things really need planning, like planning and institutions for that. So as mentioned in the beginning, SADC has this regional mining vision, and it has a regional industrialization strategy. So we have all the strategies, but do we have the right institutions? So these are the challenges you mentioned, concrete challenges. Do we have the right institutions to really take them on? And is there political commitment? At least from the DRC and Zambia side, there is. But do we has it translated to any kind of concrete institutions? There's this battery council that was created in the DRC, the Congo Battery Council. But we need to be very institutions have to be created very strongly, so that there is incentives, there is continuity. I emphasize on continuity. It doesn't have to depend on elections and that things goes down. It has to be continuing. There has to be reliability. There was mention of resource nationalism, but resource nationalism also has to be done in a way that is strategic. Again, about the ladder, you have to have a plan and be realistic. What kind of skills do you have? Because skills is the number one important, as everyone mentioned. So if we don't have the required skills currently, how do we build it? In DRC, there is this Lumumbashi Center of Excellence on Advanced Battery that is being created. So it's in collaboration with other institutions around the world, including Japan and Germany. So we have to have a plan, what does it take? The Africa Green Mineral Strategy outlines these strategies, but then concretely, what kind of skills do you need? What kind of technology? Who are the technology owners? And here, our Asian counterparts are very important because they are the technology owners. It's not the US, it's not even the European Union, it's the Asians that have the technology, especially on these battery-related issues. So who are they? But of course, as was mentioned by our Asian counterparts, they also need to be, we need joint ventures. We can't just say export bans and then, not have a plan. We really need to see how we go up the ladder very constructively, very realistically, not be emotional about, it, but very economic oriented. Who has the skills, even looking in the regions, as was mentioned, and that kind of link has to be made. So concretely, what do we do at AMDC, at the Africa Minerals Development Center? We are in our phase where we are revamping. We are renewing. Was mentioned, it used to be a project under the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Now it's in the African Union. We have a strong voice on the continent. So first of all, we do benchmarking. Where are we with the policies? Who's doing what policy? We have started doing that, assessments to have a benchmark. And then we have the country mining vision. We have the Africa Minerals Governance Framework. We have all these frameworks that we see which country is doing what. And also we have to go regional. So we see, and then we provide technical advisory advisory services, capacity building towards policies, etc. But more importantly, because we feel that, you know, it's not enough just to say change your policy, practicalities. And that's why we are trying to be the in-between goers. And that's why we are very excited about this new connection with Asian economies, with the Asian countries, is because we really need to think together on win-win, but also localizing these value chains in Africa. So that kind of practical issues that we are looking into. So we really look forward to working with our Asian counterparts on this. We already have some kind of dialogue going on. As we sit at the African Union, as you know, everything comes to us. So currently, let's just put it this way, we feel like critical minerals, or green minerals as we call them, have become the #1 contested issue. So we are getting suitors, let me put it this way, from everyone, including the United States, which was never in this space before. The United States is here. European Union, of course, they are here. They're always here. And they are partially funding our center, as maybe some of you may know or not know. European Union is there. China is there, but, you know, not concretely. We need like a concrete agreement or a working relationship with China, with Japan, with South Korea, all of these Asian countries as well. So that at the end of the day, we are in Africa. Our position is that we have a strategy. We have all this Africa Mining Vision, Africa Union Community Strategy. We now have the African Green Mineral Strategy. We know where we want to go. So for us, it does not even matter who is coming. It's just that we want to have, the goal is to value add, industrialize, transform in a sustainable way. We didn't mention environment and social impacts today, but in general, we are also concerned about making sure that, you know, we address the social and environmental impacts and mitigating them as much as possible as well for our people, and use that as a loop, as Dr. Jordan was mentioning. We are 600 million people are still in the dark in Africa. So we use this also to electrify and you know, industrialize also by, for instance, manufacturing solar panels. Why not? If you're still importing solar panels, then we are again back to the what we were saying, and not exporting raw materials and not manufacturing. So it's the same, it will be the same issue. So we really want to make sure that we industrialize and we electrify at the same time, and we use our partnership with the Asian countries very fruitfully. Thank you.
Very relevant points, Marit. Thank you very much. And thank you for expanding on what you actually do at the AMDC, because indeed, this is why we partner with you, because we would like to avoid any duplications. You are our #1 partners on the Africa Green Minerals Strategy and on many other programs. Thank you for being such a powerful partner. But one of the key aspects you highlighted, which is very relevant for us here, is that technology owners are not any different from Asia, because this is the platform we are using in order to look at the technology which must be used in value addition within Africa. So thank you for highlighting this, and for highlighting that indeed some work is ongoing. The 2- and 3-wheelers are a low-hanging fruit, and this is something that, you know, you're working on together with our partners. So thank you, Marit, and thank you for also answering some of the questions in the Q&A box, because that adds me time. I'm still in good time, and so when we cover, you know, both, then we are running quite well. And this is something that I would like to encourage all my speakers to also do. So thank you very much, Marit. And if there are any other questions from our audience, please continue bringing them in. They will be answered as we go along. My next speaker is Mr. Katayama, who is working with the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC. Here, I would like to follow up still from Marit's question on Africa being viewed as a raw materials exporter. And from what she has explained, we would like to move to reverse this in accordance with the Africa Mining Vision. But one of the ways that has been explained so far since we started this webinar, is that there is need for support and cooperation with external stakeholders if we are going to move up the value chain. Now, my questions to you are two, Mr. Katayama. One, what are the specific areas of support and cooperation that you see Japan coming up with in order to bring this transformation? And what challenges, what key challenges would need to be addressed in order to be able to highlight and be able to get this support in reversing the export of raw materials? The second part, the second question I will also highlight at once, such that you come in general, is on financing of mineral projects. What is the experience you have in funding regional projects that we could look at in order to help in the financing of these mineral projects? From your experience in GBIC, what is it that you see that we can undertake? And feel free to, if you have looked at the Q&A, to answer those questions. But if not, then I'll also give you time at the end. Over to you, Mr. Katayama.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. And yes, I'd like to respond to the first questions. What would be the specific areas of the next action for Africa, and what kind of the cooperation Japan can bring? So, from investors' perspectives, it is very welcome of this kind of the diversification of the procurement of the critical minerals. As I mentioned, Africa is one of the very prominent investment destination for the critical mineral sectors, because under the current demand increasing for the decarbonizations, so underdeveloped critical minerals minings is a very attractive for the investors. And from my perspective, it is very essential for setting up the investment climate, especially for the development of the mining, which requires a very, very long term. So three elements are required for the investment climate. The first one is a stable government and the predictable mining policies, which also includes the mining tax and also the royalty issues. Such kind of the economical conditions should be secured at the timing of the investment. The second point is transparent mineral supply chains. This is also very keen, especially for the foreign, investors in the developed countries, because yes, they are pressured by the other investors. So these kind of the SDG issues should be well covered in that project. So the second point is a transparent mineral supply chain. The third point is it's much more related to the logistics issues, but the reliable infrastructures for such countries should be required. Yes, as for the mining sectors, especially in the middle of the African continent, it requires some kind of the railway or the ports to export such minerals. So those elements should be required when the foreign investors making a decision for the investment. And building up the resilient mineral supply chains, within the African continent, it is also essential, especially for the refinery industries. The skilled workers are required for such industries. And as a panelist already mentioned, when you expand such industry, when you grow up the manufacturing industries in Africa, it also required to establish the market itself. I believe that yes, the current demand for the small size EVs very high in Africa, but regarding the full scale EVs and the batteries require much more expensive, and such kind of the economic power should be required within Africa. So from my perspectives, the setting up the whole value chain or the supply chain within Africa is not made at one time, and it takes long time to establish those supply chain within the regions. So I think it is very important that step-by-step approach is required. So maybe you can start with the mining sectors, and also regarding the refinery sectors and the manufacturing sectors requires some kind of the capacity buildings. From that perspectives, I think it should be noted that recently, this month, World Bank disclosed some kind of the initiative called RISE that is supporting the whole supply chain. That supports the mining supply chain, not only the mining supply chain, but also the refinery industry and also the manufacturing industries. But even though they did not provide the capacity building in the industry sectors, but they decided to support the refinery sectors and the manufacturing sectors. This is the key for this initiative. So the World Bank realized that the setting up the whole supply chain is very important, but step-by-step approach should be taken on these sectors. So I think from the perspective of Japan, Japan can also collaborate with the project basis. In August, our Minister of the Economy and Trading, Mr. Nishimura, paid a visit the African 4 countries, Namibia, DRC, Zambia, and Madagascar, and then have some kind of enter into the memorandum of understanding with those countries for the exploration of the minings. And in Japan, we have the other governmental institution named JOGMEC, which covers the exploration mainly, and also supporting the development of the mining projects. And of course, JBIC can provide finance to the project, the mining project, together with the private finance to mobilize the private finances. So in each phases, the governmental institution can support the such phases of the mining project. And our colleague mentioned, right institution have the right purpose and the right role for that development. So yes, people should understand what kind of the tools can be used for these phases. And of course, JBIC can support the mining project at the right timings. That is the my answer to the first questions. And I move to the second question regarding the finance experience in other regions. As I mentioned at first, yes, I can introduce the example of the Latin America, where the cooperation between the Asian and the Latin American countries has been successful. Latin America also has a very huge natural resources, including the minerals. And yes, they combine the advance of such industry with the growth of their countries. So for their development, Asian partners have been contributing a lot. First of all, yes, they have a rather stable ground for investment. As I mentioned earlier, the three elements, stable government and the predictable mining policy they had. And also they, yes, establish a transparent mineral supply chain. And also, yes, they have some kind of the ports and the railways to export their products. And based on such investment climate, mining major companies and Asian mining companies feel comfortable and decide long-term investment for the development of the mines. So yes, not only the iron mines, copper, the bauxite, and these days also the lithium and the nickels. Such kind of the development has been well going. So when you consider a mining project profitable, the finance or the leveraging investment is required. And from the investors' views, the three elements are also required for the financing for the project. The first one is strong sponsors. Needless to say, the mining company who has a very long track record and long track record for the development and operating the mines, and also the talented operational staff who can handle some challenges during the development. Such kind of the players should be involved in that project. And yeah, probably we expect the major companies, but not only the major companies, quasi-major companies or the middle-sized company, but who lead the industry, such players should lead the project. That is the first element. The second element for the successful finance is a commitment by the local government. Usually local partners play a very critical role, especially in the local mining permit or the environmental consent from the local authorities. So since the development and the operation period is not a short period, involving the local partners also give comfort to the financiers. And the third point, this is the collaboration between the African countries and the Asian countries. Third point, third element for the successful finance is inviting Asian partners who provide the offtake and technology and finances. And especially in Far East Asia, each country has a huge national companies or the trading house who handle the huge demand for such minerals. So they also might have the technologies to facilitate the mining development. And also such countries have the governmental financial institution like us to provide finance for the mining project. So inviting the Asian partners can fill out the lack of those elements. I mean, the long-term offtake and also technology and the finances. And such Asian partner could complement the viability of the project. Then if you find such credit-worthy off-takers, the financiers can find such project can be bankable. So I think, yes, 3 points, the elements. The first one is a strong sponsor. The second one is a commitment by the local government. And the third one is Asian partners who provide the offtake, technology, and finance is a key element for the project financing. I think, yeah, this is my answer to the second point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Katayama. I will not repeat what you have said because it's very clear. The only point that you raised, which has not been emphasized previously, is the need for infrastructure, the supporting infrastructure, which is very key in our attraction of investment as well. So thank you for this, and thank you for your sharing your information. Now I'll move on to the private sector in Africa. Dr. Kone, this is linked to what Mr. Katayama has been speaking about, the infrastructure and other things that are required. But you gave us some teaser in the beginning, which I would like you to expand on. This is in terms of exploration, because we cannot talk about sustainability, which Marit was talking about, if we do not have continuity of these resources. The observation that has been made is that the share of exploration budget for Africa has been declining as compared to the global expenditures. This was 15% of the total global expenditure on exploration spent in Africa in the year 2013. In 2022, it came to 10%. So this is despite the fact that even in 2022, the abundant mineral resources that are required for the renewables were known, and that we saw many governments providing incentives for investment. Now, Dr. Kone, what is it that is going wrong? In other words, what is changing? We expected the direction to be the other way, but it's going the opposite side. Can you please highlight some of the constraints that the companies are facing in this area and what we could do in order to reverse this? Secondly, I also would like you to comment about the mining sector being used as a catalyst for sustainable development, and highlight maybe some examples from your experience. I saw some questions, but if you don't have time to, if you haven't had time to look at the chat, we can highlight those thereafter. Please go ahead with this.
Thank you very much, Fred. And with your permission, I would want to zoom into the first question I have seen in the chat box, which I think is relevant to the subject matter I discussed in the first opportunity I had. And it has to do with exploration for new entrants. This question was asked by Aliu Jao, and is asking the kind of strategy they should adopt. The reality is that exploration is so critical. It provides the pipeline of projects. It gives us that kind of assurance, because we all know that the minerals we mine, once they are mined, they are not replaceable. So for you to sustain your business of mining, you need to devote some resources to exploration. So exploration is quite critical. Unfortunately, exploration tends to be quite high risk, because the risk of success is rather low. So that is one aspect of exploration. And then exploration companies tend to be investing, rather than making money. So although sometimes people even consider them to be mining companies, there's a distinguishing feature about exploration companies. Theirs is to spend money to look for the minerals in commercial quantities for us to actually mine. And then the lead time between exploration and making a commercial find, it can be quite lengthy, and that makes the endeavor quite risky. So you have a long gestation period, you have cyclical commodity prices, you have a probability of making a commercial find so low. You put all of these together, it makes exploration extremely risky. Unfortunately, we don't tend to be speaking about exploration that much. And I think it's important that we do this. And I want to commend, the organizers of this webinar for bringing this matter up for conversation. So the quick answer to that question is that because of these features of exploration, countries, especially when you are a greenfield, where you don't have the experience of exploration, what you need to do, and that's my personal recommendation, is to be smart about it and reduce the hurdles or the barriers to entry. So you don't, impose taxes and fiscal burdens on the company, which is bringing this high risk investment, to a country to come and explore. In some jurisdictions, even before you start, drilling and doing your assaying, You are paying lots of VAT and taxes and levies and so on and so forth. It is quite disconcerting for exploration companies because, like I have said, this is high risk capital. However, what a company can do is to adopt what I generally would call loss leadership. So in the face of exploration, a country may be deemed to be making losses because the company has invested money, but there are no returns for the country because it doesn't pay taxes. But if a company makes a commercial fine, then I believe that is the place where government can now step in and say, look, you need to pay your fair share to the country. So in summary, all I'm saying is that we just have to be strategic and decide where we want to impose fiscal burden on exploration companies. Regarding raising of capital internally, it depends on the life cycle, where a company is within the life cycle. If you come to a country, Ghana, we've had years of experience in exploration. And in fact, if you go to the regulator who actually, works with the sector ministry to license, mineral rights, you would find that majority of the licenses are actually held by Ghanaians as opposed to foreigners. But if you're a startup, you don't have the technology, you don't have the skills and all of that. Naturally, you want to encourage investors to come into the exploration space. But like I have said, it has to be loss leadership because you know that once they make a commercial, even if they don't make a commercial fine, whatever drilling and assaying they do, the expectation is that they will present this information. It goes to enhance your geological database as a country. So that should be the approach. And then as you grow up the cycle, you make sure that they employ people from within the country. You can't even, for example, ask the exploration company by legislation to say support, technical institutes to be able to train a lot more technical people in the exploration area. So you give yourself a plan, like a 10, 20, 15 years plan, making sure that by that time you would have had the capacity to do it yourself. And then alongside the mobilization of resources, who are the entrepreneurs within the country, to be able to devote some of their investment into exploration. So we don't want to leave that space for just FDI, forever and ever. We know it is high risk, but as they say, high risk is high return. So if you make the investments high risk endeavors, generally your returns tend to be much better. So we need, as Africans, we need to make sure that we also have a foothold in the exploration space. Now, regarding what is happening to investment into exploration within Africa, if I cast my mind back, you look at the investment map in terms of attraction of FDI into Africa's mineral resources, it appears that West Africa seem to be a leading jurisdiction for investment as far as mining is concerned. But West Africa has actually received a jolt in the last few years. In fact, I would always make reference to the fact that of the top 10 gold mining companies in Africa, 5 would come from West Africa. But we all know what is happening within West Africa. West Africa has unfortunately been a hotbed of the jihadists. And therefore, our brothers within the jurisdiction, not in Ghana, but Mali, to some extent, Burkina Faso, have also unfortunately suffered the brunt of these jihadists. I know mining companies who have shut down completely. I know exploration companies, if mining companies cannot operate, how would exploration companies operate? So that has been a major issue regarding investment into Africa and like I said, into West Africa in particular. So that is a major issue, which I believe is accounting for this downturn. Hopefully, if we are able to work together as a group within West Africa and we are able to address the sense of insecurity, hopefully we should be able to have a bounce back. And once you have a bounce back, I'm sure that even investment into critical minerals within West Africa would also improve. Over and above that, I also made reference to the uncompetitive fiscal regime sometimes. Because exploration itself is high risk and relatively capital intensive for junior miners and for exploration companies, it is important that we lower the burden or the hurdle of entry. I always make reference to the loss leadership principle. That is what we need to consider, making sure that we lower the burden, the hurdle for the companies to come and invest. And once they make a commercial fine, then we would be able to tax them and get them to pay, their due to the states. Again, the cost of holding land is also another barrier to investors, especially within Africa, and it's something which we need to look at. Where I come from, I'm used to payments like annual mineral rights fees, ground rents, which has to be paid, and all of that. These need to be looked at. Related to that has to do with the whole question of security, which I've already alluded to. But sometimes even the licensing regime, sometimes it takes inordinately long periods for the licenses to actually be renewed. Just yesterday, we had the exploration group of the Ghana Chamber of Mines having meetings, and one of the key issues they have, for example, has to do with the undue delay. This is something we've been speaking with our minister about, and as well as Minerals Commission. They are putting in place measures to really help address this, but still, we continue to have challenges, and so on and so forth. Even submission of reports. Don't forget that these are relatively small companies. They have relatively small budgets, so little issues upset them. So it's important that we facilitate the whole process of exploration for these companies to come in. As we all say, investment or capital is fungible. So if you don't create that climate for investment to feel comfortable in your jurisdiction, in all likelihood, it will move elsewhere. I had issues around resource nationalization. I don't want to talk about resource nationalization. Rather, the penchant sometimes for resource owners, for countries to tweak fiscal regimes, even as a company has made investment. And where's more when there are no conversations or discussions about the change in the fiscal regime. These are issues of concern to investors as well. And it's important that, look, once investments are made, we actually respect the terms of the agreement or of the legislation which has been passed, which enabled the investment to be made. So you would find generally within the last decade or so, a new creation of investment agreements and project development agreements, which effectively endeavor to freeze the fiscal terms, i.e., this is the fiscal term under which I made the investment. And for a certain number of years, I'm agreeing with the state to say you cannot change the fiscal regime, just to make sure that the investors have the kind of succor, the assurance, assurance and certainty that this is the fiscal regime which will prevail within the given and mutually agreed period. Don't forget what I spoke about. You have cyclical price fluctuations of the commodity. You have high risk when it comes to investment. Even the probability of making a commercial find is so low. If on top of that, you are actually tweaking the fiscal regime, even without consultation, it creates lots of problems for investors. So sometimes you assume, but there's a disconnect between exploration and mining proper. But the reality is that when a company is coming to invest in exploration, it looks over its shoulder, over the fence to find out how the mining companies, those who are actually mining, are treated. And therefore, that may be a red flag for a company who, for all intents and purposes, would want to invest in a particular jurisdiction. So in essence, these are the very reasons why we believe that instead of going up north in terms of our flow of exploration investment, unfortunately, we've had a downturn. And like I said, a few things we need to do to tweak a few things, policy, environment, making sure that there's more predictability and more certainty for us to be able to attract investment into exploration, which I have said is also critical for the sustainability of the industry. I would also want to speak about some of the constraining factors and how to, of course, I mentioned them already, and how to really address them. More collaboration within West Africa, governments of West Africa working with ECOWAS, just to stem the insecurity within West Africa. And then let's see whether we can share a lot more intelligence as well, and the deployment of novel technology to really support the security architecture we have within West Africa, just to make sure that we have a semblance of stability within West Africa to promote investments into the jurisdiction. Then again, there are technologies around artificial intelligence. Because of the high risk nature, high investment for exploration companies, these days there are novel technologies to support exploration, and one of them has to do with how artificial intelligence can be deployed to support exploration. We know that in terms of capacity, in terms of ability and competence within the whole world, Asia appears to be a leader. And I think it would be useful that Asian countries partner with us to help us develop these technologies to support exploration. Because as we have said, exploration is one singular activity which assures us of a pipeline of projects going forward. I also mentioned the need for us to look inwards as well to raise capital to do exploration, because like I have said, it goes ultimately with ownership. And the question of ownership is critical. So to leave that space for just FDI without our involvement, especially for countries which are actually mature in the exploration and mining curve, it's important that we start thinking differently. What can we do with our pension funds? We tend to be long dated. What can we do with the sovereign wealth funds within Africa? Would we, for example, encourage them to buy a part or invest a little bit of their investment into exploration and early stage mining companies? And then I would also want to suggest that we adopt a carrot and stick approach. So we have spoken about how to lower the barriers for exploration companies, which for us is the carrot. But the real stick has to do with making sure that once we give them the licenses to actually do the exploration for us, they do as they have actually committed to do. So based upon the various work programs that they commit and present to regulators within West Africa, we need to hold their hands to the fire to make sure that they do the actual drilling, because without that, it becomes quite speculative and they are holding on to the tenements and then they actually trade in the tenements. That is not the intention for giving the mineral rights or the exploration rights to the investors. And therefore, it's important that we hold their hands to the fire. Some jurisdictions have sanctions. In Ghana, there are sanctions, for example, if you don't do what we are expected to do by way of the work program, the cost of the work program has to be refunded to government. Then the other question has to do with how can we use mining for sustainable development? That's a very interesting question, because like we have said, mining itself is about a resource which is finite, and once it is mined, cannot be replaced. But we all know that if we strategize properly, we can leverage the mineral resources we have to support sustainable development in our various countries within Africa. Unfortunately, over the years, we have not focused on how to do this. And our refrain has always been on mineral revenues. How can we increase royalties? How can we increase corporate tax and so on and so forth? But slowly, the narrative is changing. We are beginning to see that countries are getting quite serious about how to harness a lot more of mineral value within the country. And here, I'm not talking about just revenue, but the whole issue around value versus revenue of mining, endeavors is so important in this conversation. And it is about changing orientation and changing about our mindsets. If indeed you want to see a lot more value from our mining industry, then we need to change our mindset and ask the searching questions. What can we do to really harness these resources within the country? And I give examples. Every dollar which is spent by a mining company has inherent within its value, and not just dollars or any local currency. And it goes with skills, it goes with capabilities, and so on and so forth. It goes with even manufacturing and production capability. So it's important that we track and monitor the flow of funds in the first instance. In Ghana, we endeavor to do this. And once you do that, it provides a kind of helicopter view for any will-be analyst to ask certain questions. So this is the amount of money which goes into this area, into that area, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, you realize that these monies actually leak outside the country. The real question is, what can we do to actually make sure that these monies are actually kept onshore? And one of the things we have decided to do, for example, is to do a mapping study around the mining industry. What is the relationship between the mining industry and agriculture and manufacturing and fabrication and hospitality and in sports, anything you can think about. And once you do this mapping and you do the analysis, it will provide some useful insights. And on the basis of that, we can now start having conversations with entrepreneurs within these various areas, other sectors of the economy, and incentivizing them and motivating them to actually produce and offer these services for the country. So there's so much we can do on the back of the mining industry in terms of sustainable development. The real question is, are we ready to do it? And if it is so important that we do this, then we should have the metrics as a continent to report this. I'll give a typical example. A couple of years ago, we did a lot of advocacy with our national standards authorities. We call them Ghana Statistical Service. You wouldn't believe that even contract mining was considered as a service in national statistics. And we said it is not proper, it is wrong. It is only after about 2 or 3 years ago, based upon our advocacy, engaging with the National Standards Authority for this to be reversed. And now we have contract mining as part of mining proper. We need to go beyond the high level contributions of mining, speaking just about export revenue, gross merchandise exports, talking about GDP contributions, payment of royalties and corporate tax and so on and so forth, and go into the second and third level of contributions. Because if indeed these linkages are important, then we should also make sure that in our national statistics, these are also reflected. I think it's important that in Africa, we start having a different mindset. And probably we need to charge Africa Development Bank to actually take the mantle and start running with this idea, such that across Africa, we should start looking at our national accounts differently from what we have done over the years. I think I want to hold my breath here. There are a few more things I want to say, but we have just about 15 minutes to go. So I hold my breath. Yeah. Probably there'll be a few questions, and then I should be able to answer them. I think the moderator asked questions about examples, and my favorite one has to do with activated carbon, a relationship between mining and agricultural products. We are talking about the coconut shells, which can be carbonized, steamed, and then effectively you activate the surface, remove all the tar, and then it's activated to be able to absorb gold in solution for you. These are things we need to do. Meanwhile, we import about $10 million worth of activated carbon every year. If we aggregate all of this within Africa, you can imagine the opportunities we're actually shipping outside our continent. So this is just one example. Other examples around plain rubber, the relationship between rubber and the mining industry, relation between, say, caustic soda and the mining industry and other sectors of the economy. So many examples we can give, which allows us to use mining as an anchor for sustainable development within Africa. I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kone. Thank you very much. I just, it's only the time that limits us. Otherwise, the information you have is always very helpful. And thank you for continuing to support our work in ECOWAS whenever we call upon you. Thank you very much. Now, we have 15 minutes to go. And in the next 15 minutes, I will want to bring in two people to tell us what they are doing in this area. But maybe before I do, is there any question that is pending that my panelists would like to answer? I see a lot of the Q&A questions have been answered, but I don't know if any of the speakers would like to have 1 or 2 minutes to respond to a question that has not been responded to. Mr. Katayama, are you okay in the chat box? Q&A, is it all right with you?
Yep, I think yes.
Okay.
The question for me is covered by my comment.
Perfect, perfect. Marit, is all well with you?
Yes, there are a couple of questions that I answered on the chat. So I think in the interest of time, it's better to, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Paul Jordan, is it the same with you?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I think most of them are covered.
Okay, you see.
I have one comment that's not a question. I just like to reinforce what Dr. Suleimanu said. That is, we must build an African mining industry. If you want the linkages to happen, like backward into activated carbon, into caustic soda, or forward, the empirical evidence is overwhelming. Countries that make those linkages, they're not done by transnational capital. They're done by local capital. So there's a high correlation between developing local African mining capital and using mining to industrialize. The use of foreign companies, they will not make the linkages. They'll make linkages back to their home countries. Or they'll make linkages to Sri Lanka because they have central purchasing. They buy all their activated carbon from Sri Lanka, which makes sense, for them, but doesn't make sense for us. So I 100% agree with the wise Suleimanu. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Jordan. So I'll now move on to our last part of the segment, which is to call upon 2 people to give us their perspective. One, the Chief Minerals Officer of the African Development Bank, Jerry Haji. Please, I'll give you 5 minutes. And after your 5 minutes, then I'll call in now, who is the head of the African Development Bank Group External Office in Asia. Your reflections, please. Jerry, first.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Fred. I think time has gone, but the reflections that I like to make is that, looking at the state of play, of the green minerals industry in terms of geopolitics, the access, we've talked about ownership and the extraction. We are all aware that most regional bodies and countries have developed their critical minerals strategies, and Africa is also doing one, which we are doing with the AMDC, UNECA, among others. And just to say that we've taken cognizance of the commonalities in the various critical minerals strategies that, has been done by Canada, UK, China, Australia, USA, and the EU. And what are some of these commonalities? They need to strengthen domestic supply capabilities. That is the first one. That is localizing segments of the value chain. And that is what the green minerals strategy also seeks to do. Number 2, diversifying supply chains, especially sources of raw materials, so that no single continent or country, would have the order, over these minerals. The third is improved risk monitoring and mitigation of the battery and EV landscape. And the fourth, championing sustainable practices in the mining and processing operations, as well as the need to accelerate project implementation. I would like to reflect also on some of the success factors of China or Asia where Africa, can learn. Is the need for homegrown solutions to adapt technologies. We all know that the lithium-ion technology originally is from the US, but the Asian countries were able to adapt it quickly to their homegrown systems because they already had the lead acid battery technologies, etc., which was running. So adapting this to the lithium-ion was very quick. Another lesson that I want us to also take note is the need, which has been highlighted in any case, industrial policies and incentives. And we've seen this in recent announcements of China, extending tax breaks for consumers buying clean cars through to 2027. The incentives have been estimated at $72.3 billion. We've seen the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act of the US, giving a lot of incentives, and this has caused a lot of companies going to the US, to establish giga battery factories. We've also seen ways to finance the BEV value chain. We've seen governments now investing in the value chain. Examples can be Ghana, that we have the Mineral Income Investment Fund investing about 33 million in a lithium project in the country. We have Angola also doing same, investing about 80 million, from their sovereign wealth fund. And these are examples that other African countries could follow. Marit mentioned about the low-hanging fruit. That is extremely important because currently Africa imports about 4 million pieces of these 2 and 3 wheelers, which is estimated about 2.8 billion annually. And we can displace this by manufacturing, this equipment on the continent. I cannot end by not mentioning exploration incentives. Key. So African champions must be invited to the table, and given incentives, we need to invest using part of our pension funds. Governments need really to invest in exploration if we want to really take a chunk of the opportunities in the BEV industry. It has been estimated to be 8.8 trillion by 2025 and 56.7 trillion by 2050. Africa must rise to the occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that perspective, Jerry. Let's hear from now your perspective.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, Fred, and all the ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so there's not much time. Allow me to highlight some of the key points that emerged from discussion, particularly from the Professor Dao Jing and also Mr. Katayama. Yeah. So I go from the summary of the policy. China company have been investing around 10 billion every year in Africa mining project. So it's driven by the Chinese going out strategy, and Japan recognized global importance of security critical minerals. Mr. Katayama mentioned that about MSP, Mineral Security Partnership, and also he pointed out the 5-point plan for critical mineral security, demand and supply, and the supply chain responsibility at the Hiroshima G7 summit. This is in order to carbonization drive. Okay, so I kind of skip what I wrote. So let's go to the African policies and market. Professor Dao Jing emphasized that the significance of joint ventures and the cooperation between Africa and the Asian markets. He underscored the need to effectively manage demand side in relation to the need in local market, including EV. I think it's Mr. Marit mentioned that, and also Mr. Katayama mentioned that, and also demand for foreign countries. And also Professor mentioned about caution against the adverse effect of the resource nationalism, and the proper use of the restriction is necessary. And he also mentioned that the spill over the technology, not just thinking about the direct investment, but for the long term human resources, etc. This is also Mr. Paul mentioned. And Mr. Katayama highlighted that for the investment standpoint, stable government, predictable mineral policies, transparent supply chains, comprehensive infrastructure development, including a transportation network, port and railways. He also emphasized that the need to provide capacity building in the refining sector and undertake steadily implementation by step-by-step basis. Actually, I wrote many things, but I have to skip, right? And what I want to emphasize that actually Mozal, this is a project in Mozambique, which is very successful story. And actually JBIC Finance and the availability of the cost-effective hydro energy played pivotal role in Mozal economic value. I think this is related to practicality mentioned by Dr. Marit Kita. Mr. Katayama mentioned about the success stories of Latin America. And I skip all he said, but I believe that many African mining company will take a similar pathway, like a Codelco in Chile or Vale in Brazil, to become major players in global market. And in order to do that, I think the wise participation and the management by local players, along with the foreign investors. So equity participation for some of the portion would be extremely important. This is, I think, the Professor Daujin pointed out. Okay. FSCFTA is very important. Mr. Paul Jordan mentioned. Okay. So I have to make a conclusion. Thank you for your attention. Like Director Vanessa and Mr. Coney mentioned, that let's create a win-win or mutual benefit situation between Africa and Asia with right partnership. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much now. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Paul Jordan. Thank you, Marit. Thank you, Mr. Katayama. And thank you to Professor Shah in absentia. Thank you, Dr. Kone, for this session. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the questions that you asked. And thank you also for being here present. Back to you, Yuna, for the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred, and then our distinguished panelists and dear colleagues. Thank you very much to all the panelists for this fruitful session. I also would like to thank our participants who asked the pertinent questions today. I hope this webinar brought to you good knowledge and the exchange of lessons learned to enhance cooperation in developing green minerals value chains and establishing relevant supply chains in Africa. Developing green minerals industries and value chains in Africa could yield significant economic benefits. The continent holds abundant reserves minerals vital in producing renewable energy technology. The African Development Bank Group will continue to lead strategic efforts with the African Union and also other relevant parties for regional cooperation on green minerals to drive Africa's industrial development and economic growth and the mutual partnership with Asia. Also, AFDB will strengthen existing partnerships and new ones developed among Asians and African stakeholders towards establishing the battery, EV, and RE value chains in Africa under win-win conditions, as many of the speakers highlighted today. We could not end this event on a better note, I believe. So thanks to Fred, our good moderator, and a big thanks to the ECNR team and Asia office. Thanks to all our 7 distinguished panelists once again, and thanks to all of you, our great participants. Great to see you, and then stay safe and then stay well. We will see you again for the next edition of the series next year. Thank you very much.